Hello and welcome to Windows in Time, Railroading in Southern Oregon, presented by Jackson County Library Services and the Southern Oregon Historical Society. I am Briston Strong, Programs Coordinator. This program is being recorded, so please mute your microphone and turn off your camera to ensure quality recording. There will be a time to answer your questions at the end of the program. Jackson County Library Services acknowledges that its libraries are located within the traditional lands of the Shasta, Takelma, and Legawa people, whose descendants are now identified as members of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, as well as of the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians and Modoc Nation, who were forced to relocate to Oklahoma. We take this moment to recognize the Indigenous peoples whose traditional lands are where residents of Jackson County live today. JCLS is committed to fostering understanding, deep respect, and honor for Indigenous people, and we encourage you to learn more about the land that you reside on. For more information, go to jcls.org/land. And the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Jackson County Library Services. And with that, I will pass it on to the Southern Oregon Historical Society to introduce our speaker today.
Very excited today to have with us Robert Hirning. Robert Hirning's been a lifelong rail fan, and since childhood, he's pursued trains worldwide. He's followed them across most of North America, from the Arctic to the tropics, through Asia, and through Europe as well. His presentation today will focus on the tremendous impact that the railroads have had on Southern Oregon. They'll also discuss aborted schemes that might have changed things even more so had they come about. And without much ado, we're happy to introduce you to Robert, and today's talk is Railroading in Southern Oregon.
Thank you all for coming today. Railfan is short for railroad fanatic. And so I want to point out first that our area has two reasons why we have been what I would call centrally isolated. We have, first of all, the geography of the area. To the south of the Siskiyou Mountains and to the west of the Coast Range, Cascades to the east, and the Calapuyas to the north, all of which have made transportation pretty difficult. And of course, that was reflected in railroads that came to the area. The other reason that that we have been centrally isolated is economic and financial. Many of the railroad schemes that were, and the railroads that were built, were not built for the benefit of Southern Oregon. They were built for the benefit of the robber barons of the time, over 100 years ago, and I'll point that out. It's been a boom and bust cycle for particularly where I come from over in Josephine County. Gold, copper, timber, and then now cannabis have gone through boom and bust cycles, which have not benefited the locals in the long run. But that's another story. I want to point out, start out right now with when people first came to the area. Let me try to get this cursor started. Here we go. Okay, the Oregon Trail was a branch off of the main trail to the west. As you can see here, right in the Idaho area, the California Trail split off, going down through Nevada to Sacramento, over the Sierra Nevada and famous Donner Pass. Later, that became the transcontinental route on the railroad. And the other branch the Oregon Trail went up to the north and followed the Columbia. See right here, if I get this cursor going again, I keep losing it. Sorry. Yeah, so it just went up through the northeastern Oregon. Our area down here is just about halfway between both of these trails, and was not settled from a direct east-west connection from the east. it was actually settled more over the Coast Range because of gold that was found. Let's see if I can make this thing. I'm not advancing here for some reason. Oh, here we go. Back. Yeah. So the Oregon Trail, and this is a painting of it. This is a actual spot in northeastern Oregon where they went over the Blue Mountains. Not rugged like the Siskiyous, not rugged like the Coast Range. This is that same spot, the picture I took of it, right in that very same spot. And that's where the railroad ended up. The Oregon Trail here, it says Oregon Trail 1843. Coming out in these Conestoga wagons. This is further to the west of there on the route to the Columbia. And the actual trail is today what it looks like. But one of the things I want to point out about it is that it was an easier route to build a railroad at a later time. It peaked in the 1840s, 1843. Shortly after this time, gold was discovered. Well, as soon as gold is discovered, things happen. 1849 in California, 1851 in Jacksonville area, and 1852 in Waldo. I don't know if you know where Waldo is. It was named after a Whig candidate for governor in California because they thought it was in California, but it isn't. It's in Oregon, and it's not very far from where I live there. That was the sailors' diggings, it was called. Some sailors from the coast had made it over the Coast Range, and there they found it in the placer deposits for the mountain. Well, the next event that happened in this, there was talk of a transcontinental railway, and it was beginning to be looked at in the early 1850s. The route to progress, a guy named Judah went west during the Buchanan administration to take some preliminary surveys. And in 1860, Lincoln was elected. And of course, the Civil War broke out pretty soon after that. The war was going on between 1860 and 1864. But it was not long after that and it was actually during the war that the Transcontinental Railway was being constructed from both ends by immigrant laborers from Ireland and then from China, proceeding towards a central point there, which is Promontory Point. You probably know of this. Meanwhile, this guy named Ben Holliday was a entrepreneur. Notes here. He was a drover. A drover had mule trains, and he worked out in Missouri, actually moving the Mormons to the west towards the Salt Lake City area. He also assisted the army during the Mexican War in moving stuff during the get the year right. He sold out to Wells Fargo in the 1860s and decided to try his hand at railroading. Went up to the Portland area and got into a scheme, which was just a paper scheme called the Oregon Central. It didn't really exist, but he was able to bribe his way into getting some funds. He was a high roller, and my note says he was described as being clever, shrewd, cunning, illiterate, coarse, and completely unscrupulous. So he cobbled together this 20 miles of track, and this is during the 1860s. It was called the Oregon Central. But to gain some legitimacy to it, it changed the name to the Oregon and California, the ONC. There he is in all his glory. Now, the prize that the government had for building railroads was not to give the money, because the government didn't have the money. They had land. And this is called land grants, and you may know all about this, but I'll review it. You can see that there were these land grant swaths across the nation, and this was a huge amount of land. I mean, this was 20 miles each side of the right-of-way. Every other square mile were given to the railroads. And this led to, of course, a lot of mischief. The rules were supposed to be that they would sell it off in small holdings. Well, right from the beginning, the credit mobilier on the transcontinental line and all sorts of other schemes came up so that the people involved could put the money in their pockets. You see that to the north here this was what became the Northern Pacific Line, and this central one here, this was became the Union Pacific with a branch called the Kansas Pacific. And there's another east-west segment of it down here, which eventually became Santa Fe. But there's only one north-south line, and that was the ONC. That's the Oregon and California. And the government put up, let me see if I can find it here, grants of 12,800 acres for each mile of track. And so they proceeded to continue down through the Willamette Valley, building the Oregon and California Railway, getting these land grants. I think the total amount of it was an enormous amount of money, almost enormous amount of land. Yeah, that it was 3,700,000 acres of federal land available to any company that built from Portland to San Francisco. So that was quite the incentive. But finances as they are, there was a huge financial collapse, a financial crash, September 18th in 1873, and that wiped out the ONC and Holiday and all his finances. Banks and brokerage houses collapsed in a swoon, awakening only to find themselves in the grip of receivers, and the stock market had to be shut down for 10 days. Sound familiar? And nothing got built. Here's a picture that shows the square miles. Each one of those little brown things is a square mile, and that's the land grants that were, even today, what's left of the ONC lands. I'll be talking more about that specifically in a little bit. Well, enter another person here who was totally different. This was Henry Villard, who was actually German-born, and he obtained the control of the ONC by going to Germany for health reasons. He probably had tuberculosis, but he recovered from that, and he made contact with the German financiers who were hopping mad about that, losing their money at the ONC, and he calmed them down and was able to refinance and rebuild the line going south. It was interesting. He had gone to the United States to avoid being drafted into the Russo-Austrian War, the Prussian-Austria War, and became a pacifist and a decent person, from all I can see and read about him. So they moved on to build on down the Willamette Valley, went pretty quick. But then hitting the Calapooyas, things went slow. And you can see here on this picture, this is just below Glendale, coming down into Grants Pass into the Rogue Valley. These tunnels and huge curves that really are not great for railroading. One of the problems is if you ever take a garden hose and you try to drag it across the lawn, no problem, but you go around a few trees and you really have to yank on the thing. And that's the problem with flanged wheels on these curves. The other one being gradient. If you try to pull that uphill against the trees, things get worse and worse. And then, of course, tunnels. This is the bridge over Cow Creek. And this was a shipper's special that I back in 1989, I think. Anyway, the getting across the Calapuyas was slow going. It's, as you know, when you go from here to Eugene, things are pretty quick going until you start heading up from Merlin and Sunny Valley, and then you're going up and down and up and down and up and down for quite a ways up until you get to Roseburg. Railroad reached Grants Pass, and this is the ONC in Grants Pass, I think 1890. Okay, we're going to go on to another event that happened here. What happened next was they made pretty good progress coming down through Medford because it's flat. You know, it's not a lot of problems. They had to cross the Rogue and Bear Creek and so on, but didn't have a real big problem. And then there's the Siskiyous and how to get up over the Siskiyous. And so they surveyed a route that was out way to the east of where I-5 is now, called Buck Mountain, and started grading and building tunnels up there and ran out of money again. This is the history of it, is of just running out of money. And the ONC then really went bankrupt. And this was, next event was what happened. This guy's Charles Crocker. Now, Crocker is one of the big four who built the Transcontinental Railway in California, out of Sacramento. And he was in control of what the Central Pacific, it was called at that time. But Central Pacific became Southern Pacific. And the Southern Pacific took over the ONC to complete it and run a line over the Siskiyous. But instead of this yellow line here, which was the route through Buck Mountain, way to the east, which was a 2% grade. And it was also in a face where they didn't collect much snow. They had their eye on that land grant, and they had their eye on quick gains financially. The pink in here is I-5. If you see the pink in here, that's I-5. And so from this point here, which is Tunnel 13, that's above Shanahan's is the name of that. What's the name of that? Yeah. What's the name of it? Callahan's. Yeah, just above Callahan's there is Tunnel 13. They built this alternate route, which is almost 4% grade, with these tight turns and narrow tunnels. This locked Southern Oregon in forever to being a backwater. Of course, the Calapuyas were hard to cross, but this one thing made a huge difference. And what did Southern Pacific want to do? Well, here's the grades. You can see how tight compared to the east side there, where the contour lines are pretty widely spaced. Right in there, it was just too tight for mainline railroading. If you go up there now, you can go up, and this is the monument put to the last wagon road, which was replaced by that rail line. And the first passenger train went over that line. I think it says the date on here, but I think it's obscured. Well, anyway, this is the locomotive of the first passenger train to go over there. So here's what we've got is the purple, or the pink on there that's the Siskiyou Line. Now I have to realize at that time, these other lines were not built. These others up here, there was nothing else. It was just coming down from Eugene on this Siskiyou Line, Roseburg, Grants Pass, Medford, Ashland, and Black Butte to That's at Weed. That's just south of Weed. They built a station for Merlin in Grants Pass, and they shipped it up to Merlin on the railroad. And set it down there as the Merlin Depot, a real muddy mess. So here's now looking at closely at the checkerboard pattern, and things have changed over the years, but this was the original, many of these are the original O&C square miles that were part of that land grant. I think it was in September of 1901 that McKinley was assassinated and killed. And his vice president was Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt was quite a character in this whole story because when in his election, the election was 1903. See, he was the vice president. He wasn't elected, but then he was elected again in 1904, and the campaign was in 1903. And he said he was going to clean up that O&C mess. He was going to clean up because it was pretty clear that what was going on was skullduggery, what they had done. And E.H. Harriman was behind this scheme. They had gone up to Portland with some notebooks and went into the bars and seeing if they could find somebody, buy them a few drinks, and let's go over to the land office here and we'll sell this this land here. You can have it for $2.50 an acre, and we'll pay you that. But you come over to the land here, and then you just sell it. You just turn it over to us. And so they sold it again for $40 an acre. And this is particularly the land that eventually became Medco land around here. And that's how that happened. So the Teddy Roosevelt administration got wind of this, and he lowered the boom and did it. He put about 1,000 railroad executives, all sorts of people connected with this scheme. They were indicted. And the federal government took the land grant back again. And this is critical to the history of this area, is this O&C land. What you're looking at here in this is Medford side of things, Medford and Ashland. This land became federal land again. Became Forest Service land. And the counties, there were 6 counties involved that had land on this land grant. The counties were Douglas, Coos, Curry, Josephine, Jackson, and a little bit of Klamath. But mainly Josephine and Jackson counties were affected by this. They went, well, wait, this was going to be our tax base. We were going to have taxes from all this land. And now you took it back. How are we going to get the money out of it? We can't tax the federal government. And so it went to court over and over and over again. Let me get my year straight here. It was 1915. It went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said to the Southern Pacific, well, you guys actually you did build the railroad as you were supposed to, but it was supposed to be for $2.50 an acre on that. We took the land back. We'll give you $2.50 an acre. So Southern Pacific made out okay on the $2.50 an acre. A bunch of their guys did go to jail. And then the counties were still squawking. Well, what are we going to do? And so there was another act, the Hepburn Act, I think it was called. You look it up here. No, the Chambers-Ferris Act of 1916, which allowed that half of the timber revenues from these lands would go directly to the counties. That's called the O&C Fund. And you probably have been around here for a while. You realize that the O&C Fund was a big windfall. When I came here 50 years ago, Josephine County was rolling in dough from that 50% of the revenues from the stumpage. But things run out. And if you take 80% of the timber in 20 years, what happens? No, it's just not there. Maybe it will grow back and maybe you can use it wisely, but the ONC fund collapsed. And that has been the recent history of particularly Josephine County, and I'm sure here too, where one thing or another, the sheriff's department scrounging for money, the libraries closed and so on because of that ONC. They've had stopgap measures of the various things that they call the something Schools Act and so on. But the ONC fund, which funded everything in Josephine and Jackson County, was no more. Okay, let me go further here. Oops, oh, this one. There we go. Yeah, there's E.H. Harriman. Good. Then the station in Grants Pass, which you may know was right on G Street there. They built a shopping center on top of the spot. And in Medford here, the main line, let's point out again here. This is the main line coming through, if you can see the pointer, okay. The main line coming through from Central Point. Now, Central Point, the Southern Pacific, which they own this, they said, well, when you guys build the station, this is going to be the big major part of the valley. This is where everything is going to be. This is the Central Point. And the town fathers, no, you build your own station. Why should we come up with the money? So Southern Pacific went down the line a little ways and said, how about you guys down here? You want to build a station? And Bedford did. And that's Central Point doesn't even have a station, and they're just a grain elevator, and Bedford became the city. Jacksonville was going to be, they were mad as hornets because they were avoided. The line just went whistling right on through town. So you can see here they built a line, and it was still active 50 years ago out to Jacksonville. There's not much of it left there now that I can see. There's some little hints of it. And then the other line was the Pacific and Eastern, which went out of what's now the Railroad Park and crossed Bear Creek on a bridge not far from the mall, just across from the mall. It was still there a few years ago until they redid the interchange. And it went out on this line to show you here. Yeah, see, here's when it went out towards Butte Falls here. This is part of another stillborn scheme. Going out of Grants Pass to the west was an idea of the California and Oregon Coast Railway. Again, people didn't seem to have much of a grip of what the geography was. I mean, you go down 199, can you imagine building a railroad across that? But they had this great scheme that they were going to go to the coast, and this was part of Crescent City becoming a major harbor and international port, and that the railroads would all connect from the coast through Grants Pass, through Medford, through the Pacific and Eastern, cross the Cascades, get to Klamath Falls, go on from Klamath Falls down the Modoc line and join the Transcontinental. Well, this didn't happen. And it used up a lot of money, and a lot of people got rich on it. But the where I live here is in Tequilma. See, do you see Tequilma here? And that was a very rich mining area. This thing is a little tilted because the California line here is running on a diagonal rather than an east-west, but that's the California line is right here. And that's the 42nd parallel. And then, of course, the Smith River Canyon here, that's this pipe dream to build a railroad through it. Not only were they going to do that, they were going to build it up into the Siskiyous here to pick up some mines up there. Crazy idea. But they tried, and they went ahead and got rail together and started building out of Grants Pass to the, this is a map of Grants Pass, see which says the Grants Pass Y. And the two, this was a branch off of the ONC, which, well, now Southern Pacific, came down here and branched off and came across the Rogue on a bridge and on down through what's the area now along 199 towards the Road Community College. The bridge was not all that great. It was kind of rickety, as you can see, and it was subject to things falling down. This was financed initially by the city of Grants Pass through the Chamber of Commerce. There was a lot of hoop-de-doop about it, but they finally got to Wilderville. I don't know if you know where Wilderville is. It's where on the Applegate comes into that area. They crossed the Applegate, and they had a locomotive, number one. They rented a couple of cars from Southern Pacific and held a Labor Day festival there, or Memorial Day. I guess it was Labor Day. And if people went out there in their cars, they fined them. So they had a big party out there, and this was going to be the beginning of this great railroad to the coast. A man named Colonel Draper was in charge of it, and is what's called Draper Valley is out there in the Illinois Valley, and his house still stands. Well, the passenger services never actually came to be. This was the passenger car. Yeah, and it was, as they called it, the yellow streak. The locals called it the yellow peril. And they made it out there as far as Wilderville, and here's their great locomotive number one. Oh, getting ahead of myself here again. Well, what happened was that a company called the Towie Brothers that were in the business of building rail lines and were involved in something I'll speak of in a minute here called the Deschutes War. They were engaged in completing the line to go all the way to the Illinois Valley and all the way to Waldo from Wilderville, and they started building in 1914. And that picture of all that ceremony in Wilderville there with all the ladies in their hats, that was in 1914. War had just broken out in Europe, World War I. It was just August, the war had broken out. By September, they were having a party, but the Towie brothers did have a little clause in the contract, and it said, if America joined the war, they didn't have to finish the contract. And so they started building along what is now 199. I'm going to go ahead a little bit and get. This is the route, but I'm going to go backwards here. Where they cross Slate Creek, and here we go. So they started building along 199 from Wilderville towards Hayes Hill. And you can still see pieces of that old roadbed down through here. This is the old roadbed after it crossed. And they got to the bottom of Hayes Hill, and the war broke, and America joined the war. And that's as far as they ever got. So let me go back here a few pictures and show what happened then. Okay, so the problems with this were that it was first built without any real thought to the future. It was just to build something real quick, spend a lot of money and hoopla. So this is the 1955 flood of the Rogue, and that took that bridge out, and that was the final link. Here's a piece of what's left today of that line, just back of a business there that was Diamond Cabinets. And it's doesn't have any real reason to be there. It gets lost in the blackberries. They cross the Rogue River here. If you go to 199 and cross on what's called the Parkway, just beyond M Street, you can see those bridge abutments. And here's, now they've built a plant right in front of where the line went. This is the waterworks with a red roof on it, the Grants Pass Waterworks. But there's the bridge abutments from that bridge across the Rogue. It came up through what's now the Parkway area and kind of more or less followed it from, went from Grants Pass, following the Redwood Highway, along the edge until it got to Road Community College. That's right along the edge there. If you go 199, you can see the old roadbed. And then follows something called Demery Drive. Well, this guy Demery was the receiver after it went bankrupt. So that's Demery Drive. Gets to be smaller and smaller, a little cow path down there towards the Applegate, and then Slate Creek Bridge, which is still there. And this is just about at the bottom of Hayes Hill. So that's the story of the California and Oregon Coast Railway. Now let's take a look at something else here that I want to mention. This is the Deschutes River. Going back to my cursor here. Okay, so these lines along the Columbia River, two rivals, mortal rivals, built these, Harriman and Hill. Hill was responsible for the Northern Pacific and later the Great Northern and the Burlington, and Harriman was in charge of the Southern Pacific and the Union Pacific. And they got as far as where the Dalles is now and realized that the only good route into Oregon where they could pick up a lot of, there were no more land grants, but there was a lot of ranching and mining and timber, and it was the Deschutes River. And the Deschutes River runs up to Bend. There's Prineville, there's Bend. And so they started out along this river. There's the overview of the river itself. And as you look down on this, you can see this is a train on one bank, but there's also this on the other side. And that's the old gradient. And the two lines were so competitive that they started shooting at each other. There's a boxcar there left. That boxcar has been left there since the early 1900s. Unfortunately, this trestle burned in a forest fire. I took this picture from a freight train in 1979 since it's burned, but that's the line on the other side of the river. It's a nice rafting river, and this is where it is today. Well, what happened was after shooting at each other and trying to blow each other's bridges up, they finally settled on joint trackage, and it was called the Oregon Trunk, the OT. Oh, well, that's a way to settle things. Just let's cooperate. Good. The bridge across the Crooked River was a huge project. The Crooked River is this deep gorge, maybe 300 feet deep. And this is looking down from that bridge in a few years ago. I've been over it, and it's quite formidable. So at any rate, this is the line. A piece of the Great Northern was built from Bend on down into Klamath Falls. So now there's this route all the way on the east side of the Cascades. And those same brothers, the Towey brothers, were constructing some of that I mentioned, the same people, down to Klamath Falls. And at this point, from Klamath Falls south, the Southern Pacific, or what's now called the Inside Gateway, tied into the Western Pacific, which was this is the last segment that was built in the 1930s, but we'll go back to that at another time. But this connection point here, and then there's a Modoc line that did wander its way back out here to the transcontinental connection at the Nevada border. So this became a major route from the Columbia on down, taking some of the traffic away from our area. Got ahead of myself again. In 1927, the Southern Pacific decided that from Chemult, they would build their own new connection, the Neutron Cutoff, to Eugene. This sealed the fate. This meant now from Portland, Eugene, completely bypassing Southern Oregon, coming down here to Black Butte Junction and moving on down. No more Siskiyous, no more tight curves and tunnels. And that's the line today. And that's where Amtrak runs. And these are the reasons why our area has been pretty well abandoned by the railways. in 1995, I think it was, the Southern Pacific finally got tired of maintaining the Siskiyou Line and sold it to the a hedge fund, Fortress Wealth Management. And it became the Oregon Central and Pacific. Central Oregon and Pacific, which is now has been changed hands again. But one of the major things about it was another one of these schemes. It was a hedge fund. They're not into railroading. So the first thing they did was to close the line from Ashland over the mountains to going south. And the Coos Bay line, they abandoned that one. Again, corporate greed, and we lose our railroads. After they got done with taking out what they wanted to get out of it, then they sold it to the Genesee and Wyoming, a short line operator who has it today. They're actually a legitimate railroad rather than a hedge fund. This point is the point in south of Weed where the main line separates from the Siskiyou Line. To the left is the line would go up to the Eugene, and to the right going down south to the Central Valley. And then my son Rail here is standing in the on the Siskiyou Line. This is looking the other direction, going up. To the left is the Siskiyou Line, straight ahead. And this is pretty good running through here. You can see why Siskiyou Line was torturous by comparison. There was a water spout there. That's gone now. I think a freight wreck hit that thing. But they used to fill their tank cars to wet things down when they went over the Siskiyous to keep the fire danger down. Tunnel 13, you may have heard of Tunnel 13. I'm not sure if you have ever heard about it, but this is notorious for several reasons. First of all, it's very impaired for this clearances, and that's why you can't run double stack container trains and long auto carriers. And basically a chip car is the biggest thing that will fit in here. Passenger service out of the question. But it has another thing that you might have not known about. It's not very long. And finally, they rebuilt it. And in 2008, Genesee and Wyoming opened it again. But going back into 1927, I'm going to get my date right here. October 11th, 1923. That was 100 years ago. Oh, it just was the 100th anniversary for the last train robbery. And the last train robbery was these DeMurray brothers. There was some definite mental illness going on here. They stopped the train in the tunnel for reasons unclear, shot the engineer, and blew up the baggage car, killed the baggage man, got nothing out of it, and were on the run for about 5 years until they got caught and sent to prison. You may know the song, Somebody Robbed the Glendale Train. Well, that tells a story of it. It's a bluegrass song. It's a song that was done by Grateful Dead, among others. And it could have been Jesse James' gang and the Glendale, Missouri, but they didn't kill anybody then. And I think that was written about the Tunnel 13. So this is looking from Tunnel 13 the other way, and you can see it's not mainline railroading. Look at the grade. Look at the steepness of that. It's almost 4% at that point. 2% is the maximum. That's all drainage pipes that you put in a house. You want 2% grade for it, and 1/4 inch to a foot. 4%, you start to haul a train up 20 cars. You got to have helpers on the back and the front. And this is looking up that hill there. If they had built the Buck Mountain, it would have come in here at the right. It would have come in here. That's where it would have come in and avoided that whole tight bunch of curves and grades. You can see here, Shanahan's. I never get this right. Callahan's. Callahan's is down there to the right, to the left, and the grade will come up here around and join. If you go up, you can walk up to Tunnel 13 there, and if you do, this is the view you can get. Medford was a busy place here, and when they sold, Southern Pacific sold out to the Fortress Wealth Management, they just moved the headquarters right out of town and moved it up to Roseburg, where it is today, and this is now Porter's Restaurant. Didn't have to be that way, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. Here's Central Point. This was a shipper's special in 1989, I think, in the grain elevator. Again, no station. So one other little line I wanted to mention here is the line out to Butte Falls, which became the Medco line. It was going to be another scheme to get over the mountains and connect to the transcontinental. And it was the Pacific and Eastern. It ended up being a logging railway, and this is the logging Medco called a shay or a willamette. And if you notice, it has vertical pistons here. Here are the vertical pistons and a drive shaft. This is different from, here's another one down. This is down in Dunsmuir. And you can see again here more clearly the vertical pistons and a drive shaft. This thing was capable of going up 4%, 10% grades, hauling logs, but it was maximum speed of 10 miles an hour. This is this is on the line down out of Willits to the coast, the tourist line. But this one you can see, this is the rods on this one are reciprocal from a piston that's set the way most locomotives are. So later on, after they redid the I-5 and decided that they were no longer going to try to get across the mountains, and Medco was connected to Butte Falls and down to the Medco mill, that became a haul road. And this Y was put in by the Blackwell grade. You know where Blackwell is there probably. There's Mount McLaughlin. So to get to White City, which was one of the last shippers on the line there, they built this very well-built, high ballasted, solid welded rail connection. It goes out to White City, and that's where, as far as it went. As you may know, that was a prisoner of war camp, and they brought German prisoners in, but they brought them in the other way before they tore that out on the east side of I-5. Now this is the connection, and there's the Siskiyou Line. You can notice a lot of difference between how well built this line to White City is, and then where it joins the main line, it's back to rickety track. But this area is pretty flat, and I don't know if you've ever been there, but between Gold Hill and White City cutoff there, I don't know what that's called. That's where Knife River Mill is. The railroad does not follow I-5. It's on the other side of the mountain from Blackwell grade and follows the Rogue River, fairly flat and quite scenic. The bridge over the Rogue River there at Gold Hill, it joins back in near I-5. Here's that shipper's special again. They wouldn't let me on it, but I tried. The mill there in the Murphy Mill in Rogue River was a big shipper, and this was taken before that fire in Weed, because what they did is that in Weed they'd make parts of plywood, and then they'd ship them up here on the train and put the pieces together at this mill. And so that was a major amount of material gone, no longer. The Weed Mill burned up a few years ago. So what is left of the Siskiyou Line? Well, in my mind, the Siskiyou Line through is very, very little traffic on it. So this is Talent back in the 20s with a single car that went from Ashland to Grants Pass carrying people. And as we look ahead here, could be easily, and it doesn't have a problem with grades and curves. This could be rebuilt for 50, 60 mile an hour running through the valley to carry people instead of I-5. This is a single car of the same type. This isn't a Czech Republic, but it carries bicycles, diesel power, not expensive. This is a Lithuanian one. And there's one in Hungary. And in my mind, this would be feasible for the same route for commuting back and forth throughout the valley. North of here, when you get up to Eugene, there's Amtrak Cascades, and that's like 5 trains a day going. Oregon and Washington together have what's called Amtrak Cascades, and it's a regional part of Amtrak. But try to get there, well, you have to drive up. There's not even a bus that connects. Greyhound is abandoned the area here, and you either fly or you drive your car to Eugene. Why? Why can't we have a connecting bus? There's like plenty of these trains that and buses that go all over. They connect to the coast, they connect to sisters. Oregon just bought this thing here from Wisconsin because the governor didn't want to pay for it, so Oregon bought it. And then the other idea I have is dinner trains. This was a dinner train that was operational in the Mount Shasta area, and it was called, Sunset Dinner Train out of McLeod, California, and it had really good possibilities, but the railroad when the mill closed and the people who owned it, they got a divorce, and that was pretty much the end of the Sunset Dinner Train, which was a great idea, and I think would work just fine out of Medford or Ashland going up in the Siskiyous. There certainly isn't any traffic problem. And this is what a rail fan does, and what I do. So that pretty much is the program for today. I wanted to take any questions you might have, and thank you all for coming.